Hello, and welcome back to posted number 16. When we left off, Wolf and Frost were talking about getting a fresh start. Wolf was kind of hinting around whether or not he wanted to have something to look forward to. And one of the things that Frost said was that, maybe Rose doesn't know you as well as I do to Wolf. And Wolf sort of made him feel like it wasn't true. So we're going to start there. Um, Except for maybe that wasn't true. Just because you eat lunch with somebody for 2 years and drink the same soda and drag them out of on a skateboard behind your bike, that doesn't necessarily mean that you know them. There's a lot about Wolf I didn't know. One thing I was starting to realize, though, is that he liked Rose. Maybe not in like that way, but they obviously had clicked as friends. And when you like someone, you get upset when the other person doesn't. You take it personally. I know how I'd feel if I asked Wolf to read some of my poetry and he hated it. Maybe that's why I never showed it to him anyway. She is pretty smart, I said. Wolf shielded his eyes from the sun and smiled. I told you. Smarter than you, anyway, I asked, at least about Star Wars. Wolf laughed, shook his head, and leaned back. He laced his fingers behind his head, staring past the street lamps and the awnings up to a sky spotted with one brushstroke of a cloud. It's kind of strange when you think about it, right? How close they were to blowing each other up, one button away from wiping out the whole freaking world. I leaned back next to him. Yeah, but they wouldn't have really done it. I mean, nobody's that dumb, right? Wolf looked at me, and I knew he actually had some names of people in mind who might just be that dumb, but he was too nice to say them out loud. The next chapter is called The Sword. Sometimes things stick, like frost on a windshield or chewed up pecan rolls to the roof of your mouth, and it's annoying, especially when you can't get rid of them. Other times, though, they catch fire, like a too short fuse leading to a toilet paper roll full of gunpowder that you sprinkled inside, and then they explode. It happens all the time. Stupid dances, catchy pop songs, videos of people acting like total fools, things you wouldn't expect. The right person finds it, likes it, favorites it, tweets it, endorses it, gives it 4 stars, 2 thumbs up, and then it just spreads like an avalanche, like the common cold. Like a nuclear arms race. First one bomb, then two, then hundreds and thousands piled up in silos. It's called proliferation. That was the fancy name given to the building of all those nuclear missiles 60 years ago. I know because I read all about it while sipping juice in the middle of a smoothie shop, sitting across from one of my best friends and somebody who looked to be on her way to becoming his best friend. That's what happened with sticky notes. They proliferated. They went viral. In a matter of days, they went from something only we were doing to the thing to do. By the end of the week, we knew it was big, and not just because every third or fourth locker you saw had a note attached. It was the color change. The notes weren't yellow anymore, not all of them, which meant that students weren't using the ones that they had been forced to buy for school. They were going out and buying new pads of sticky notes because they were running out. Blue and hot pink and neon green, the color of cartoon toxic waste. Different sizes, too. Long rectangles, arrows, some shaped like hearts. Apparently they made sticky notes shaped like poo, because I saw one outside the gym. The notes jumped the social fences. Preps and nerds, goths and floaters, popular, not so popular, rich kids, poor kids, all the in-between kids. Everyone was writing them. Literally overnight they were everywhere. Viva la revolution. The biggest clue came when we walked into Mr. Seward's class on Friday and saw the blank Post-its, standard yellow, sitting on our desks. There was also a quote on the board from Albert Einstein. It said 2 things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not so sure about the universe. I thought about Wolf and me sitting on the curb outside the smoothie shop talking about the potential end of the world. Who can tell me what a morphism is? Mr. Sword said once we had all settled down into our usual spots. Isn't that when the blood in your brain explodes? Samantha Bull guessed. I had seen her reading a note when I walked in, eyes wide at whatever gossip was on that Post-it. That's an aneurysm, but thanks for playing. Yes, Mariana? Is it a bug that eats trees? Nope, you're thinking of aphids, but again, nice try. Mr. Sword was already out of hands to call on. An amorphism is a pithy or witty saying, he continued, like a kernel of wisdom, wrapped up in a single sentence. We might think of them as quotes, except for they're designed to say something deep and true about the world. And not all quotes do that. Like, life sucks and you die, Noah Kyle suggested. Or girls drool, boys rule, someone else chimed in. Yeah, that's lame, Amanda Shockey said. Her hair was purple today. How about may the force be with you, Max Connors offered. I kind of like Max. That's even more lame. No, it's lamer, Mr. Sword corrected. And no, morphisms go a little deeper than that. They speak to something universal about the human condition. They can be humorous, and they often are, but they should always make you think. And they should be true in some way. So they're like memes, somebody said? Yeah, I guess in a way. Although most of what you'll find on the internet is obnoxious or cruel. Well, the truth can be cruel sometimes. I glanced over at Wolf, a little surprised that he had actually contributed. He wasn't much for speaking up in class. He fiddled with his blank note, and then sticking it to his desk, peeling it off over and over again. And that, Mr. Sword said, pointing at Wolf, is an amorphism. Then he went back to the board and started writing furiously. I've noticed some of you have taken to posting little messages for each other, no doubt in response to our recent change in cell phone policy, and I've read a few of them. And while Liam Helmsworth is hot, may sound to you like the universal truth, I hardly think it qualifies as a profound thought that requires sharing. Therefore, I think it's worth taking a time out from Caesar's plight into ancient Rome to think about the power that language can have. After all, Romans ate morphisms for breakfast. Ew, Mariana said. I'm pretty sure she was still thinking about the bugs. So here's your assignment, Mr. Sword continued. You have 10 minutes to think of your own original amorphism, some witty little revelation that you can fit on that 3-inch square sticky note in front of you. Write it down, and I'll come around and approve it. And then after class, I want you to find some place in the school to leave your message. Some place where you think your amorphism will get the attention of the people who would benefit the most from reading it. This is your chance to become someone's perspective, to teach them something about the world in 20 words or less. A hand went up behind me, and Mr. Sword called on him. You're kidding, right? Cameron said. No offense, Mr. Sword, but this is kind of stupid. It doesn't matter what we write. Somebody else is going to come along and toss it in the trash. What's the point? Well, the point, Mr. Cole, is that all of us have something meaningful to share, Mr. Sword shot back. Maybe you're right. Maybe most of these notes will simply be thrown away. But if just one of you writes just one thing that strikes a chord and gets another person thinking, then I think it's worth it, don't you? He turned back around and took up his chalk. I'm putting a few more examples on the board just to get your pistons firing, but don't quote something you've heard your grandmother say. Tap into something you know about yourself, something you've realized about the way the world works. Don't make it too personal. I don't want to see anybody's name on any of these, but they can come from a personal place. There was another chorus of protest. I watched Mr. Sword continue writing for a minute, scribbling one saying after another in his sloppy script covering the board. He wrote, he who knows does not speak, he who speaks does not know. He wrote, freedom is the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. He wrote, the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. And the last one said, the pen is mightier than the sword. Unless you're trying to slay a cave troll, Dee Dee murmured. I instantly conjured an image of writing utensil-wielding hobbits plunging Sharpies into the back of orcs, except for instead of blood, the body spilled ink. Mr. Sword, of course, snapped me out of my little daydream. You are going to put these out in the world for others to see. You can write something provocative, something challenging, something passionate or opinionated, and even potentially dangerous, but you need to keep it clean. Don't write anything that will get you in trouble. I watched Dee Dee furiously erase what he had just written. Mr. Sword went back to the board, and I stared at my sticky note. Something deep. I thought about the notebook tucked under my mattress at home, full of secret poems that I've written over the last 3 years. There was probably something in there that would work, and in the course of 50 verses, surely I'd said one meaningful thing, right? As soon as Mr. Sword's back was turned, I felt a kick in the back of my chair. You should be good at this, right, Frost? Noah Kyle whispered, snickering. Yeah, Frost, let's see what you've got. Jason Baker arched out of my seat, trying to look over my shoulder, and I covered my note with both hands, even though I had nothing written on it yet. And in my brain, I cursed my 5th-grade teacher all over again. Back off, Wolf said in a hushed voice, turning and glaring at both of them. Jason cocked his head to the side. I'm sorry, I wasn't even talking to you. And then he leaned in close to Noah and said, oh, I offended his boyfriend. A stern look came from Mr. Sword, and it was enough to drop Jason back into his seat. You have 8 minutes, he warned. I entertained a brief image of Jason and Noah being mauled by a pack of starving lions in the middle of the Colosseum with a cheering crowd. I guess I've had too much Roman history, right? And then I turned back to my blank note. Around the room there was a ton of pencil tapping. Sitting by the door, Rose had both fists clenched around clumps of her hair. I looked at Wolf's desk. He seemed to be finished already. His paper was flipped over so I couldn't read it. I stared at my own blank square and I tried to think of something worth sharing with the rest of the world, something profound. I mean, the world has plenty of problems, like people who get kicked in the back of the chair and they don't leave you alone, but nothing I could say was going to change any of them. Mr. Seward called the 2-minute mark and I scribbled something down. He who laughs last, laughs the longest, but he who farts the loudest gets the room to himself. Maybe that's true, but not really insightful, so I erased it. I pressed the end of the pencil to my nose, and I glanced behind me in time to see Cameron Cole attaching his post-it note to his head, and it said, "I'm with stupid," and it had arrows pointing in every possible direction. "All right, time's up," Mr. Sword said. "Make sure it's legible. There's no point in sharing your wisdom with the world if nobody can read it." I had nothing. So I just wrote the thing that seemed the most true to me at the moment, something that I'd been thinking about for the last couple of days. It barely fit on the yellow square, and I had to scrunch the letters at the end. Go ahead and share what you've written with one other person in class and ask them what they think. How does it make them feel? Angry, wistful, optimistic? Meanwhile, I'm going to come along and make sure everybody's nugget of wisdom is appropriate. Mr. Cole, I can already tell yours isn't. Cameron peeled the stupid note from his head and started to erase it. I gave Wolf mine with a shrug. I couldn't think of anything, I told him. He read it, and then he stuck it back to the edge of my desk. "It's good," he said. "In fact, I can think of a few people in this room who should read it." Of course, he didn't need to name names. Mr. Sword appeared beside my desk and held out his hand. He read my note and whispered it to himself. "If you only listen to what others say, you'll never hear yourself think." "That's pretty good, Eric." He looked across at Wolf, who held his note up, half folded as if he were embarrassed to share it. Mr. Sword's expression changed as he read it. He frowned slightly, then he nodded, and he handed the note back to Wolf. I couldn't have said it better myself. Wolf took the note and gave it to me. We had both been thinking the same kind of thing, but Mr. Sword was right. Wolf said it better. His post-it said, Dee Dee leaned over and showed us what it said on his, and Dee Dee's post-it said, "The truth is a lie we all agree to believe in." "What does that mean?" I asked Dee Dee. "I have no idea," Dee Dee said. "My first one was about floaters, so I think this is an improvement." Mr. Sword finished his inspection, giving everybody a stamp of approval, and went back to the front of the room and told us it was time to get back to Shakespeare so that we could appreciate someone who understood how to use language. When English was over, we all filed out the door, sticky notes in hand, ready to cover the world in wisdom. Rose waited for us in the hall, and she showed us what she had written. "A beautiful mind is worth more than a pretty face." You should tell that to Liam Helmsworth," I said. "Or half the kids in the school," Dee Dee said. "I plan on it," Rose said. I think I'm actually going to stick it right outside the cafeteria for maximum exposure." She looked at me. "Where are you going to put yours?" I shrugged and glanced around, and then I stuck my note above the water fountain just outside of Mr. Sword's room. It seemed as good a place as any. Dee Dee said he was going to stick his note outside the gym to give people something to think about while they were getting pummeled with dodgeballs. "What about you, Wolf? Where are you going to put yours?" But Wolf had already tucked his post-it note away. "I think I'm going to hang on to it for a while," he said. And we're going to stop there. See you next time.